And we are live. Welcome to this new talk about Mark Carney. And it's very interesting before we really react to more of Jordan Peterson explanation of who we elected. How are you, D Lord?
I'm doing very well. I had to fix my Diablo 4 build, and then, by the way, all hail the new American Pope. By the way, if you guys have not noted,
I heard
the
about it.
the new Pope is the first American Pope. Follow, but he is also following the first Jesuit Pope in 400 years. So that was actually because the last Pope was the first Jesuit Pope since the ban on the Jesuits, if you did not know.
I
Now,
didn't know. I
now
didn't.
the that did happen today. Other than that, I'm doing good and keeping track of some political news. But it's been interesting because apparently, in the same breath today, you had a court block the efforts of Trump to dismantle three uh, parts of the government or parts of departments. Then but there's other things like his tariffs are so bad, he's getting a new trade deal with the UK.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff today politically. It's very interesting, so to speak.
So before we react, there's two sections I want to add. The first one is right now. I will ask you, fellow American, did you happen to see the meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump?
The new one or
Yeah,
no?
the more recent one, like I think that was Tuesday or Wednesday. He went at the Oval Office.
I haven't caught up on that. I'm sure I think I saw a photo, but it's probably going to be weird as hell.
That's unfortunate. So that's something we must react to eventually. Maybe
I
not
if
tonight,
it's
but
the weird thumbnail of a thing I saw,
I won't spoil it. We will cover it
I'll
eventually.
go look into it. I To be fair, I have been trying to level, and it's kind of weird.
We will cover it eventually.
Okay.
So now the next segment is me being worried about the future. Uh I think it's Tuesday or Wednesday just before the meeting at the Oval Office. Um the Mark Carney party, or I should say the liberals, they are trying to pass a new law that will hinder freedom of speech. They want to deplatform every independent media.
So here's the thing: you act like this has not been a Canadian thing for.
But it's worse. It's
Well,
worse.
okay, it's
There
getting
were
worse.
talk
So,
that
okay, do
there
you
were
remember the
talk of
person
that
I
in
have
the
followed for
past.
years was Mark Stein. Mark Stein was part of the Canadian or your what is it, whatever they call it, the Canadian broadcasting like thing. They have tried to censor before, like the even your liberal people that are like the liberal journalists that still we used to have in this country before some of them became sheep. They actually tried to do stuff, but like Mark Stein is independent with right or conservative leanings. He was censored for years. So
Yeah,
the thing is, it goes a two-way street. You assume that the same bludgeon they use, because in the US, the cancel culture failed because our news medias in our outlets, because Politico, I think one of the gaming sites that has been very political for years just got sold off by its parent media. Now, if you do not know, that's a big shift because that was operating at a loss. Now, in the terms of your Canadian broadcasting, like your type stuff,
It's propaganda now. It's
it's
propaganda.
literally like
It's straight up
you're
propaganda.
going to go with the state. This is the thing we warned about. Basically, either what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of state bootlickers, but it's then also the liberal endpoint with the death of free press. It's not
Yeah,
under conservatives you have
that's
death
what's
of free
going on.
press.
This is the end of freedom of speech, and it will become probably as bad, maybe worse than the UK. I heard in the UK now, if you talk against the government, you can be in jail. I feel like this is one of the next few steps Carney will take because
In the
Carney doesn't like
UK,
the
though,
position.
in the UK, just so people don't if they hear this, at this time and in there, they send people to old people's houses for Facebook messages. They go send police to go harass and ask, why did you say this on social media?
That's the next step for
Meanwhile,
Canada.
they let grooming gangs and other stuff happen. So bear in mind, it's an interesting trade-off. And if you're getting those kind of, because Australia just passed a reformed hate speech thing, because, like, infamously in the UK, a story. So an autistic girl got brought home drunk, and there happened to be a lesbian cop, and she has quite the boy look, right? And then goes, oh, and the autistic girl goes, it looks like my lesbian nana. They immediately slapped handcuffs on the autistic girl and tried to arrest her for hate speech.
Wow, this is where we are
this
ending
was
to.
a story. This was actually a major story in the UK a long time ago, and it kind of got buried because apparently
We are doomed.
the girl was halfway drunk, underage. They brought her home. They didn't get her for like a ticket. But apparently it's because they said looks like the the gay aunt. You are
That's
now hate speech.
that's disgusting. I
Don't
hate
get those
it.
kind of laws because Mandalore. You just imagine. That's God. No, you don't want that. And to this day, there's like weird stories out of the UK right now, and I've tried to confirm these further with my people that I know who deal in Europe, and they're mostly true, where they are these, it sounds outrageous basically, where someone makes a post on Instagram, they immediately send cops to investigate, but any violence coming out of unsavory migrants, so like if I ask you, in the UK currently, this is if your free speech gets this bad. You'll know this is bad. What is worse? A person convicted of doing essay or grooming people to be essayed, or a person making a Facebook post? What
The
logically?
groomer is so far worse, but the left doesn't care about this crap.
But
I
see,
hate it.
here's the thing. In the UK, they were going to throw a English woman who made a post on Facebook for 4 years, but give the guy who was running a grooming ring and an SA ring only like 15 months probation or 2 years.
That's crazy.
That's actually how far the UK has gotten. And if Canada gets like that,
we will get like that. If Carney stays in power, we will get like that, man.
No, I hate to dump that. That's actually
China.
Real. That's actually a real stories coming out that come out of the UK. Like
I'm being called
anything against that. It goes beyond the Ministry of Truth. Basically.
I'm being called a completist, a conspirationist, or whatever it's called. Like
Oh, yeah.
People laugh at what I'm saying, but I'm like, guys, wake up. People
Don't
are
no.
stupid.
Just know. Look at
Gullible
America.
people.
Look at the end goal the American progressives and the left wanted, but they couldn't implement it because people. It's hard for them to do it.
But here they just opened the floodgate. They want us to be stupid. Um,
Mm.
so let's play
Yeah.
the video and see
No,
what
but let me say this
happens.
before we start, though, because here's the thing. You have a conditioning of people. It's kind of like after 9/11 in the US. Like, you asked the question of how much would you sign over for your freedom? Would you let the NSA in your lives? Would you let domestic people? Would you like domestic
If I
observation?
got freedom, yes, I don't give a crap.
But how much just like how
Anything they can know everything they want on me as long as I have freedom. I don't care what they do as long as I have freedom.
see that's the
I,
trap
I want
kind of.
freedom of speech. I want freedom of doing whatever I want as long as I don't hurt others. I think this is what I want.
And
Uh,
here's where like that act, the Patriot Act, kind of almost turned inward. Now the difference between the NSA and the CIA is not supposed to operate in domestic waters or domestic areas. The NSA has carte blanche to do that. Now, if that sounds weird, the NSA started listening in on everything. Now, there was the argument amongst conservatives is how far do you let the government go?
as long as
That's
they
what you
let me
got to
do
ask
stupid
yourself.
things.
But what I often find is liberals do not, they are conditioned. Like, if you're not conditioned to question tyranny, they become the tyranny themselves.
Yeah.
Basically, it goes beyond the radicals eat their own. Basic, there's this concept. So don't be surprised if they start to pull out the tagline where, because what happened with the US when conservatives regained power under Trump and started to win back the House, they had passed the filibuster rule. We started using their cancel culture and their Senate and their government rules against them. They didn't like that because you got to remember the first part of the Trump's presidency, getting rid of stuff through executive fiat, is largely abused, more so by liberal people or the Democrats. Now, they don't like it when you beat them with their tool, but the concept I always, what I have said is don't bring the toy out of the toy box or put it in the toy box unless you want it played with after and used against you. That's something you guys need to consider. That's why governance, you should always think about the legacy because it's very easy. The first thing to go in a democracy and free speech, they will say the person is not the right person for the job. Like, look at France. France, this just happened. They disqualified a major opposition candidate and tried to say get her on bullshit charges. They also tried to get her on she was being unpatriotic. Remember, one man's terrorist is one man's hero. Now,
Yeah.
the problem is a lot of that is complicit. That's when you start noticing your free speech. Now, if you still have a freedom of press in
We
that
don't have
ticket,
that. It's dying here. In
okay, do
Canada,
you
it's
have like
dying.
journalist blogs that can reach out?
It can all get banned. Like this is what I'm telling you. Like Carney wants to eliminate them. He wants to
Okay, how
deplatform
much
them.
control? Okay,
He
how
wants to
much
control the media.
how
This is what he
much
wants.
control does the Canadian broadcasting laws?
As of right now, because I don't know if it's solidified yet, but as of right now, it's not at 100%, but there were bills that were passed, and I don't know if they are official and now in the law and all, but there were talks of just
What was
eliminating.
that? See, because I remember a couple of years ago.
No, that's not a couple. That's this week. That's not a
What,
couple of years ago. That's
no,
this
what was
week.
it? No, C-19. The vote when everyone, the Canadian broadcasters, were talking about the vote for Resolution 19 that was going to isolate and promote Canadian.
Yeah, that's been a long time.
That
This
was
thing.
C-19. And
Yeah.
then, but like, how much of your local media do you guys still have a local PBS style broadcasting
We have
versus like an
CBC,
NPR?
CTV, and Radio Canada, but again, like the independent media are about to get banned and criminalized. Um,
Because I'm
this is where
assuming,
we are heading at with
do
Carney
you
now.
think equivalent to now? Here's where how much power, if they have, do you guys have like any kind of? Okay, I'm assuming everyone has to have a broadcast license. They're like, oh, we don't renew your broadcast license. But yeah, like that's something you would have to look into, because how much does the people actually have? Because in the US, for us to lock down like 100% of our stuff, we would have to, the FCC would have to block all radio waves, block blogs, and
They block blogs a lot here now.
So you guys have, do you guys have the internet control?
Oh
Like,
yeah, on social media especially. But I
that's
feel
why a
like
lot of your stuff is sanitized. Because
I feel like coming next will be pretty much every website. I think Mark Carney will try to ban Facebook and Twitter and all of that kind of crap. He's pro ban everything and control everything. This is Mark Carney for you.
I don't know. No, that would be a thing of, no. I mean, the idea, like when you actually talk about what actual fascism is,
This is what we are getting soon.
actual fascism is kind of, you need a multiple complicit like parties. Like you need it to reach to such a degree of totalitarianism where you need the people to have the ability to rapidly influence, right? You need the cultural movement, because this is what made Weimar Germany and the rise of the Nazis so bad. It was a backlash to what was a social style movement or something. Then it's kind of starts off, everything in the media starts off as a nudge. Favor, like, can you not say that? It's different than the government not saying something.
Hello, everybody. As some of you may.
It's different. Yeah, I don't know this, but like, because there's a big difference, because you need to go look up the actual signs of totalitarianism and fascism. Most liberal democracies meet the conditions first, because you need to start silencing and influencing the media. You need to start getting governmental agencies and governmental people to work together willingly.
This is exactly what's going on here.
Nobel Prize winning economists to assess the costs and benefits of carbon dioxide increase over about a 100-year period. And I don't know anyone more informed than Lomberg to have such a discussion. And he certainly has concluded, A, that there's no emergency, B, that there will be some costs to CO2 increase over the next 100 years. And that'll mean that we'll be somewhat less richer in 100 years than we would have been, given our trends for economic improvement. And that, most importantly, that spending untold trillions of dollars, like Carney wants to do, $2 trillion for Canada, for example, by 2050, to ameliorate the.
This is more spending. This is exactly what's going on. They will increase our debt. They will increase inflation by having more spending. That's disgusting.
No, the thing where you're talking about, see, most people when they talk about wealth, about like in 100 years, there was a period, the era of the robber barons in the U.S. The reason why like Pittsburgh has Carnegie, the Rockefellers, that type stuff, those type of people, J.P. Morgan Chase. You can look at the new robber barons that popped up. One was Henry Ford. At one point, J.P. Morgan Chase had enough money beyond the realm to pay off the entire U.S. debt, and he offered it. Now, this was been back then, and he would have not still been broke to do it. Now, the idea of what people are talking about is if you have the right conditions with industrialization, where let's say it's not from the, well, you have the elimination of the middle class and you go back to the potential barons and then it breaks back down. We kind of have a baron style people now in the corporate culture, but they don't have as much influence as the robber barons did. Does that make sense, Multi? Like, you got the Bezos, you got the Musks. They have a lot of money, but they only have one or two companies to their name. They have one or two products. They don't have an entire industry that they can sway. And a lot of them did it through means. That's why I said robber barons were a thing. Now, the thing about it is, there is the potential rise of this style, but the greatest problem with green policy is you're devolving society, but it comes at the cost of a part of it is some of these people honestly believe that green energy is the future, but half of it is also there's companies that do it just because it's a tax write-off.
Yeah.
But there's also, we have seen the effects of the environment. Like, okay, like in the desert, right? It makes more sense to have solar farms.
Because that's the same desert.
Solar farms also have chemicals attached to them that actually pollute the area around them. EV batteries take a lot of lead.
The minor effects of climate change is catastrophic economically. So I don't really believe there is a carbon dioxide emergency, but even if there is a concern, spending vast amounts of money carelessly in a rush and panic is not going to do the planet any good, and is going to be particularly hard on poor people who are particularly dependent on, who are particularly affected by energy cost changes. So what that means is if you increase energy costs, for example, by making fossil fuel more expensive.
I also see a pattern where when Carnage, because they call Carnage in the UK, when Carnage went in the bank and made the rich richer and the poor poorer, I see pattern here. It's coming back full swing in Canada.
So before there's any
second, stop both. So what he is Peterson is touching on something like, okay, the military always plans, like we always update our playbooks where for parts of the world to deal with things like, or we have to understand, let's say there's economic collapse. Humans as a species, we have been very lucky in the last, millions of years. We haven't had any mass extinction events. We haven't had anything. We've had close asteroids. We have close asteroids, between now and about 2050, right? And you start to hear about these things. But at the same time, you do have man-made or ecological collapse that can happen, partly because the planet went through a recent pole shift change. Now, what is supposed to happen in this century that has happened before is a piece of Greenland is supposed to break off. It's an ice sheet. And that disrupts not just global. Last time this happened was about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And it just caused worldwide famine. It caused shut down the Great Conveyor, which controls things. Now, in times like this, you would need the money and investment in alternative technology to survive. You need alternative farming. You need alternative ways to get things. Now, but this is doomsday planning, so to speak, right? Does that make sense, Multi?
Yeah,
This is a lot of what people do. Now, there's two ways you can head off environmental policy. You can stop the environmental destruction, kind of, or change the way it happens, which has kind of worked and kind of failed in the same vein. But there's also this whole thing, hypothetically. It makes sense. We knew, let's say, we learn there's a PK going to strike the planet or be near the planet, and we know we can't change the trajectory of it, which we couldn't do anyways. It's going to strike the planet and cause global devastation. Right?
Yeah.
This sounds like a thing in a movie.
Yeah.
It makes sense at this point to divert a lot of money to build survival shelters or build underground facilities so people can survive. Maybe. Like that type stuff. But a lot of stuff that the green and the carbon has been based on basically junk science. Fahrenheit 9/11, not Fahrenheit, but what was the other one? The Al Gore documentary. Like when he said the frog will be boiled, they were saying within 10 years we were going to have major ecological collapse. So we wouldn't even make it to 2020. It happens every generation. 6 degrees, then it became 6 degrees changed the world, or 10 degrees. Then they turned to 10 degrees, which is a thing, and it actually happens. But you need a major chain of disasters. But the problem is, a lot of these green policies have been front-loaded, and they've only had small-scale success. Like, they have been able to preserve small-scale. But, again, a lot of this is happening in the time of social upheaval. The first thing to go in environmental collapse, let's say Haiti gets struck, like Cyberpunk universe has a whole bunch of this. Like Haiti gets nearly uninhabitable, so all the Haitians come to America, right? That's a refugee crisis. Refugee crises happen because of environmental collapse. That's how the Irish got to America. But this is all environmental policy. Either you're going to head off at home and it's hopeful thinking for the best that is based in junk science because it was peer pressure research, so a lot of scientists could keep their funding. Some believe it. Some actually believe climate science and climate change. But some, and a majority of them, a big majority of them, went along with it and tried to say it was real. But we've only been keeping track of temperatures consistently for a little of over 100 years. This is where a lot of this green policy comes from, this type of stuff. But when we say, because remember, it's liberals who always say, trust the science. Like, that's the big deal. So you got to be really careful with green research. Like, it's been
thing approximating a reasonable explanation. Mostly what you do is devastate the poor. And you devastate the poor in the Western world, and you absolutely devastate the poor in places like Africa. Now, the globalist utopians like Carney are perfectly willing to say, well, we're going to have to pay a price in the moment because the situation is so dire, and even if the poor have to suffer right now, it's much less than the poor in 100 years would suffer if we didn't take action. And my response to that is, you're willing to sacrifice the actual poor now for your hypothetical poor in 100 years. And you're modeling those hypothetical poor with your economic and climate models, which are radically unstable. And you also believe, and this is absolutely delusional, that you have the economic and scientific wherewithal to do anything like a reasonable estimation of what the Earth's economy is going to be like in 100 years. Yeah, well, good luck on that front. And so,
and it's kind of hilarious. I know someone, he follows me on Facebook. I'm tempted almost every time he comment on my shit. I'm tempted into like giving up and just blocking the guy because he's not even my friend, and he is a pro liberal, and he's like, let's save the planet. I'm like, dude, like, some places are in blackout because green energy is not reliable in 2025.
There's a story, and I saw the story and I bookmarked it. I've known the deal was happening. Okay, so Google basically just finalized the deal. So there's two major deals today. Trump is talking about going after the CHIPS Act, which is and changing it so the U.S. invests in AI and automation. But at the same time, Google also put out its finalized what's called a company called like Elemental. And I had to look it up because I've known what the deal was because Google was doing this. They renovated an old nuclear plant or old nuclear sites just to create power so they can have an EV grid. Because an EV grid takes a lot of electrical power. Because what you started to see, as I said before, in California, rolling blackouts, right? Rolling blackouts due to, they want all these electric vehicles. How do you generate the power to power the batteries and recharge the batteries?
Yeah.
You need a decent power source. The problem is, and Google just, what's funny is they just finalized it, and they also must have just got the regulation from the nuclear regulatory and U.S. regulatory body to reopen these. Now, for layman's speak about that, that means Google to open an AI platform is to provide electrical power, be self-sufficient, are going to have to reopen nuclear power.
That's funny. And again, I think the green freaks, they're annoying. Like, guys, the planet will outlive us, so there's no point of you like being for the planet. The planet will outlive us anyway. So I'm just thinking people are stupid and they make everything bigger than it should be. It's hilarious.
Because
it's definitely the case that poor people are going to pay a terrible price for the carbon dioxide emergency fear model.
And they will pay the price for these stupid green energy freaks. This is what they want. I really hate green energy freaks. Like,
so to get green energy, right? They've had to rob the third world.
Yeah.
They've literally, this is the thing, right? They had to rob the third world. Most people don't know this. Like, I've talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? The Belt and Road Initiative by the Chinese was literally to go to Chile, Argentina, Africa with all these poor. No, it is so they could get all these resources to make fission power and other things, right? That's why. But to do this, you need the minerals. So they strip mine the countryside, take it back home. It
That's
comes
funny. That's your green energy. You exploit people.
it comes at the cost, because to make the reaction chambers, you need certain metals. Where are these metals and where are these materials located? Usually in backwater third world countries.
Moment, and it's completely debatable whether these steps that have been taken to ameliorate the problem, which don't work, by the way, are going to have any beneficial effect whatsoever on anyone at all 100 years out.
It's
We just can't model
hilarious.
100 years
More
out. That's just
H4D green
no
energy
one who's
freaks.
credible thinks we can develop economic models that predict over a 100-year period. So, all right, so let's pull back from that now a little bit. So look, why don't we also take a look at, let's give the devil his due in a more comprehensive way, and let's assume that Carney's right about the carbon dioxide emergency, and he's not, and that radical steps have to be taken to ameliorate the problem, and that those radical steps will have the desired effect, right? Because
And he says radical, and it is radical. Like every single thing Mark Carney wants and desire, it's all radical. And the green energy freaks, they are radical. They are extremists. This is what's going on.
We told him that. No. Okay. The problem with Carney comes from the line of what is the evolved, I would say, the in-step liberals. The in-step of liberal utopianism. That is what his end goal is. Like, their terms of survival. Okay, there's been something we've talked, like a lot of the weird stuff, like we've talked about for years, about, if I say this project, Multi, you probably have heard of it. It's called Project 2030. Now, it sounds, it's more plausible than a lot of the stuff. The projection is by the UN, basically by their standards in 2030. A lot of countries said about 2030 because that's going to be the next generational shift. Because there's, like we've talked about things in the manosphere before, the single woman, like, not having children. The moment they hit 30, the birth rates are going to decline. The fertility rates. Everyone is put around 2030. Now, what's funny about the WEF, they are a very big proponent of Project 2030 stuff. They have been behind and funding a lot of initiatives for it, and been trying to figure out either the groundwork or the ways to make it functional. Now, a lot of the liberal utopia requires a lot of death and destruction and decay, Multi. This is the problem. You need a large-scale societal collapse. But that is usually what happens when you get, I would arguably say, a liberal society taken and let them control an area. Because look, if I say Detroit and Chicago, go look at the parts of the Rust Belt, right? Detroit, Chicago, and that parts of that region. They were breadbaskets of manufacturing. Detroit, especially, was the known as Auto City. Chicago, they're both cities that, there's another couple of cities up there that are along the Great Lakes. They were ruled by Democrats or progressives for 40 years. Basically, you could go up there and buy a vacant lot house for $100. And there's
almost
field of empty houses. Fields of empty houses. Their economy collapsed. Okay. Entirety of a collapse. And you're talking, if that's in-stage liberalism, right? In-stage liberalism, takes the nth degree of that, and something inevitably causes the collapse of that area, and then they have to rebuild the industry or whatever the area, because those people don't want there, and then it traps the poor people there. Like, to my knowledge, Detroit still hasn't recovered.
That's true.
Like, it's that weird area of, if you get that in Canada, and like, that's the weird thing.
We will be like that in a few years.
It's a very,
Because Carney's promise is
that is
that
the
if we dump
for liberalism. Does that make sense, Multi? Because that's actual historical examples. Look at Chicago and look at Detroit.
Yeah.
People, the poor
$2 trillion into renewable.
Sorry.
That's true.
The poor people always pay the last. They are used as the stepping stones.
That's true.
And net zero, that's going to have a measurable impact on the climate and carbon dioxide amelioration, and that's going to be beneficial for people. But we don't have to guess at this anymore, because there's been a number of countries, including Canada, that have taken steps to ameliorate fossil fuel utilization and to move towards net zero. And so let's start with Canada. So one of the things you guys might have noticed is that in the last month, Trump signed $1 trillion international deal for the sale of natural gas. Now, the Prime Minister of Germany, the head of Germany, sorry, not the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister of Japan came to Canada a year ago, 2 years ago, cap in hand, asking the Liberal Party if Canada could make long-term arrangements with their countries to provide them with natural gas. And Trudeau said he couldn't make a business case for that. And Trump just signed $1 trillion deal. And I guess that was the business case.
Facts.
And that's $150,000 for every Canadian family that went down the drain just with that one deal. And there's estimates that the Trudeau Liberals, the Liberal Party, has put the kibosh on $650 million worth of natural resource projects over the last 10 years.
And it will continue under Carney, because Carney was part of the Trudeau team.
What he just talked about is a deal where when we were going to give natural gas. Now, what's funny is there was another story that just came across the stuff where Europe is going to make. Okay, Europe surprisingly wants a lot of EV vehicles, right?
Yeah.
To get off in natural gas. Like, we are supposed to get. So Germany just announced an initiative in the EU to wean themselves off Russian gas imports by 27. Okay.
Yeah.
3 years, but give or take. That's with deals and with other things. Maybe you're going to have to find natural gas elsewhere. What's funny about this is when Trudeau, remember I talked about the Keystone Pipeline before? They blocked ours. Now, what's funny, under both Obama and Biden, they both. So a bunch of coal miners and other people voted for liberals. What was the first industry do you think they attacked? The miners.
The mining.
The coal. Yeah. Coal, they shut down coal production. They shut down. Coal is used in manufacturing.
It's hilarious. People vote for something and then they get shut down by whatever they voted for.
And because they shut it down, they wouldn't open up new mines. So coal, it became very expensive. Energy power, when we had a really cold winter in the U.S., stuff spiked. Energy bills went through the roof because it was harder to get either power or get the mines, because you couldn't either open up commissions, you couldn't do this, right? This was happening. Now, when the case that he just brings up, right? Think about it. Trudeau literally passed off a deal with Japan, because I remember that deal with Japan coming over to open the pipeline and get a hold of your natural gas for their country because you guys have it and they would pay for it and they could use it, but you had blocked measures with the US. So the Japanese tried to do it because it's the same thing. Now, think about it. Trudeau killed the bill. Now, that means Carney, if he has the same platform, will do it. But how are you going to provide power? You can't do that. Think about what I said, too, about the mining. They hate the mining.
Carney will cut everything again.
So that's how we've been solving the carbon dioxide crisis from the Canadian perspective. And what's been the consequence of that from the environmental side? Well, first of all, Canada produces such a tiny proportion of carbon dioxide output on the international stage that we don't even count. Plus, our country is so forested that we're radically negative in the carbon dioxide production direction anyways. And even if we have rectified our carbon dioxide output by calamitously destroying our fossil fuel economy, it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever, because all that's happened is that China, that has, like 25 times as many people as Canada, and India, which has even more people, economies and populations that are so large that they make Canada fundamentally irrelevant on the industrial and the population side. All they've been doing is picking up the slack. And so China's carbon dioxide output has increased radically over the last 20 years, as has India's, swamping any possible effects of climate amelioration by tiny populations like Canada. And
so basically, if guys don't really get it, that Canada is so irrelevant and it doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we do. Therefore, even if we do changes, if the bigger player don't do change as well, that's wasting space. That's
this is why last time we talked about this and Liz for Doman brought it up. We're doing good, Pepita. The idea is the concept, right? Is remember I've said it. India and China both have larger carbon footprints. Like in the US, we have made strides to have cleaner industry. We've done it. But the problem is all these people, like, what is it? The Kyoto Accords, the Paris Climate Accords. If you go back to the Paris Climate, these things all have issues.
As long as other people that are bigger than us pollute, it doesn't matter what we do. That's what's going on. So again, that goes back to what I keep saying. The green freaks, they ruin our economy for what? For no valid reason outside of I want to feel better about myself. Well, the rest of the world doesn't give a crap about it. It's hilarious. I hate this crap. Really, I'm so tired. Like, this election has proved me that I'm not a Canadian.
No, but you're getting.
I'm not a Canadian.
The problem is that I don't think a lot of the Canadians realized that this is the. Okay, see, the reason why the U.S. wanted out of the climate accords was it's a net negative because China isn't doing dick all. India isn't doing anything.
And China said 2050. It's like 25 years from now. Like, I will have my kids by now if my relationship goes well. So like it doesn't matter. It doesn't. So let's keep playing this.
And this comes from a group of people. China still has to provide power by coal power, and they open up one once a month.
Yeah.
And you're talking, okay, so pollution is so bad in China. They
They wear masks.
You can go, well, that's kind of been a thing for years, the air pollution, because it's a respiratory virus haven in Asia. Just because proximity of people and everything else. The cultural and then just that part of the world is a haven. So back when Beijing got the Olympics, they deported their poor, kicked them out of the city. The air quality was so bad. So when the athletes got over there to do basically practice, they had to run around in Chinese were like, oh, but we need to clean up. Factories need to not run. You got to turn off this stuff while the prior, so there's not there. Their air was so bad. The athletes were like, we're trying to run and work out properly, but we can't. Like the oxygenation and all of that was fucked up.
And then the Canada thinks they are the heroes by doing green stuff.
And this is the thing they don't tell you about parts of China. Industrial pollution in China is so bad because they, within 30 or 40 years, did what we did in Europe and we did in America with the Industrial Revolution in nearly 30 years. Okay? They have so much industrial pollution. Their entire countryside is contaminated. They basically did the game speed run of civilization with the Industrial Revolution, catching up to the rest of the world within 30 to 40 years, or attempting to. They destroyed parts of their environment, and to maintain that, they have to open up coal plants, they destroy their air. India's done the same thing. And this is one thing we said about the carbon footprint stuff. Like, I think if even during the Olympics that was down in Rio de Janeiro or Brazil, that stuff had issues in air quality things. That was the third world. You're talking, well, Brazil's basically a first world country that might as well be a third world country. But these are countries that were all part of making these policies. But if you cannot get them to change their policy, their stuff, it doesn't matter. U.S. stops consuming oil. That's more for the Indians and more for the Chinese.
That's true.
More, it goes elsewhere. That type of processed fuel always goes to an area. And it's a weird thing.
And the Chinese and the Indians think, well, why can't we benefit from industrialization just like the West has? A question Africa's asking as well. And they're absolutely right. And so all it's meant, you can see this with Australia, for example, because Australia has foregone all coal-fired electrical production in their country, but they ship coal to China, and China builds coal plants like mad, as does India. And since we all breathe the same air, all that's actually happened is the industrial power that could have been Australia's and Canada's has been shifted to China, which is a terrible authoritarian communist state, and to India, which at least has the advantage of being somewhat like a Western democracy. So the Canadian contribution to environmental improvement has been negligible, absolutely negligible, no practical effect whatsoever, but the economic consequences have been absolutely dire. So Canada now, the richest Canadian province, has a lower gross domestic product per person. So that's an indication of our total economic productivity. We're lower than Mississippi. Canadians produce 60 cents of value for every dollar the Americans produce, despite the fact that 10 years ago, and that's before the Liberals were in power for a decade, Canada and the US were equal.
So this is more proof that liberal policies, they fail. If we speak about economy, purely economy, liberals were a disaster. They are destroying the economy, and Carney will do it even more because his budget he projects is even higher than Trudeau's. So it's nasty. It's
So
crazy.
there's actually something to this. And I'm surprised Peterson actually does know about this, unless you know anything about Australia or parts of. I mean, you can say like. So in the UK, as an example, let me start there. Liberal policy's been really weird. Apparently, either with the compete with steel industry global, right? They have in parts of areas of that nation, they've had some of the oldest steel mills and oldest iron mines, etc., etc. They were known for steel processing or their ability to process their own steel and their own minerals brought in. In Australia, their industry started because of environmental policy, started regulating them and started hurting them, and it made them near impossible to run. In Australia, there is entire things like if you ever see some of the mines, Australia is borderline so uninhabitable where they're going to have one of the world's largest lakes. And if I found the photo of one of their strip mine operations, you know those giant trucks?
Yeah,
The giant, like, hauler bulldozer trucks? Not mean like things,
yeah,
like that haul dirt?
yeah.
They look like Tonka toys on the sides. They look like Hot Wheel cars in the landscape.
We were at parity.
Let me say,
And the forecast for Canada's economic development.
Let me finish saying this. Do you know how deep of a strip mine that has to be? So they refill in this strip mine, right? One of the oldest mines, and it's produced the most iron ever. Now, what's funny, Australia had one of the best steel industries themselves to actually do manufacturing, guns, bullet, tanks, etc. Parts for military, those type parts. This industry, all they had is raw resources. Part of the reason Australia has such red dirt is because it is so rich in iron or other minerals. Now, knowing this, it made sense to have a heavy industrial base. But there's also policies of reclamation. If you open up a strip mine, you must fill in a strip mine. But that very large strip mine, they can't fill in. So they're going to turn it into the world's largest man-made lake. Basically. And
Wow.
it is... They're going to do what they can, clean up the pollution. But all this came at the cost. The liberal policies, they turned a section of their entire economy to become like consumers, right?
Yeah.
Where you're taking that industrial base, it's actually causing issues. So now they're pulling the steel out of the ground, refining it. And that steel that's not getting processed is either going to China or India.
More pollution.
And they are... And you know what's come at the cost? Factory jobs to refine that steel. So you have more poverty. You have losing your industrial base.
Losing jobs like in Alberta because of stupid.
Does that sound like parts of Canada over liberal period where they went after the mines?
Yeah.
You are talking, this isn't a new phenomenon. Miners lose jobs. You can pull it out of the ground, but there's only so much manufacturing or industrial jobs.
Liberals, they ruined Alberta, they ruined Canada. It's disgusting. Let's split the rest.
Development, and this assumes something like the continuation of the policies that were put in place by the Trudeau Liberals, is that we will have the worst economic performance of the 40 most developed countries in the world for the next 4 decades. So if you want more of that, much more expensive fossil fuel, much more expensive air conditioning and heat for your house in frigid Canada, and you want your children to live in a society that's radically poor so the globalist utopians can fail to do anything for the planet, then Carney's your man. And these corporations that he worked for and these positions he held were all positions that enabled him not only to follow the doctrines of those who believe that net zero is an existential necessity, not only to follow them like Trudeau did, but to lead them. Because you see, Carney is not only an acolyte of the net zero globalist vision, he's a true leader. And it was Carney who was a climate envoy to the UN, for example. And he also organized a very large number of the world's biggest financial institutions to pursue net zero policies in preference even to their financial obligations to their shareholders. And so to understand Carney, you see, you have to understand that he prioritizes the hypothetical health of the planet, narrowly defined as the proportion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So a very narrow environmentalist view. He prioritizes that above all else.
So what it means, it's planet before economy, it's planet before people, it's planet before everything. And it's disgusting. It's Mark Carney. He doesn't like the people. He doesn't want the people. He wants us to go extinct and broke. This is the Carney mentality. This is the Carney philosophy. It's disgusting. I hate it.
All of the values that he describes in his book, everything that Carney holds dear, is predicated on his view that we're facing an apocalyptic future on the environmental side that's all due.
I think before the environment collapses, our economy will collapse. Our people will die. This is what's going on. But hey, let's fearmonger people into climate change and that kind of stuff.
So you have to understand, part of the 90s generation, there's a section of why millennials, like the population shrink among millennials or the people. It's in my age group, and there's a section they didn't want kids because they convinced an entire potential generation of kids that if you, there's always enough, you could adopt or whatever else. Women went back to work, basically, kind of a thing. They convinced an entire generation that too much population was bad. So they stopped having kids. Do you know what happens later on in a generation? China went from a one-child policy just to preserve the population, right?
Yeah.
They are about to open up. They went to a two-child policy. Their rate of their deaths to maintain that population. So the thing about they have an entire population of old people. Like if I said right now with Japan as an example, because Japan hasn't replaced themselves very good, because their birth rate now effectively is 0.84. That's their fertility rate. Old people run the society. The young people are dying out halfway before they're having kids.
Because they're exhausted.
Then you're talking about this is due to maybe not policies or working to provide for a family. It's different for them. But in the case of liberals, they said, oh, if you have too many kids, overpopulation, don't have kids. China is collapsing because their old generation that has stayed alive forever, the West, like look at parts of Europe, it's being upheld by old people.
Yeah.
Younger people aren't having kids. So Europe has been on the verge of an entire societal collapse because you're not having the fertility rate of replacement. And that's like, oh, you're going to have too many kids. It wasn't like, oh, we're just going to have one kid or two kid, right?
We don't want kids anymore.
China, and this is the thing, because the idea of fur babies, right? That type of stuff has been an idea for them. But the downside to this is they're not with the replenishment. Humans at this rate, we are probably going to go extinct or have a major population drop off. Like if
20 years. Give it 20 years.
hypothetically, at this rate, like Japan has said, if they don't reverse their negative growth, they're trying to literally pay people to have kids. That's how bad it is, because you're talking, that's how bad they're, as I said, they're about a 0.84 right now. U.S. has dropped down. Most of the Western nations have all dropped down to a 1. So if we have a major war, or just hypothetically some sort of major collapse,
it's the end of humanity.
It's pretty bad with the replacing, like with people replacing that. Because if we have another situation similar to like the Black Death, oh, we're looking at like straight parts of the world will go back to nature. That's how bad it's. The population center will just die.
Except Africa. If Africa will survive, they keep making kids.
Only to carbon dioxide overproduction. That means we don't even pay any attention to any of the other environmental problems that are confronting us, like oceanic overfishing, for example, which also constitute issues that should be of some concern. And so Carney's entire vision of the world and vision of Canada hinges on his faith, and I would call it a quasi-religious faith, that the planet's atmosphere is to be prioritized above absolutely everything, and that's such an emergency.
That includes the humans. So Carney is not there for the humans. He's there for the planet. This is your prime minister, Canada. You elected a green freak.
See that everything is permitted. Everything is permitted. And so that means Carney can do things, for example, like present himself as the kind of outsider of the Liberal Party, for example, who will come in with radically new views and develop Canada into an industrial powerhouse. It's like...
But they don't want to use fossil fuel because it's not green enough. Well, fossil fuel is exactly what the rest of the world wants, and natural gas as well.
The thing is, how, if a society, right? Okay, people have tried to wonder why there was a period, like the TV show, right? Everyone's familiar with the Crab Fisher show where they go up to parts of Alaska or they go up to Canada, right? They do crab fishing. They're finding sections of animals and wildlife, mass extinction among animals, which is technically never a good sign when it happens. We're not talking beach whales. We are talking the amount of like crab harvests were limited for periods. Now, overfishing, right? It's kind of like if we didn't hunt deer in the U.S. or boars, they would easily explode in a population. We humans hunting, right? That's healthily, right?
Yeah.
We do this, and but with like what he's talking about overfishing, like the concept of environmentalists, right? And their dreams, it's a weird thing because 99% of all life on this planet that has ever lived is extinct. Maybe 1 to 3% of it is still alive. Like, you're talking in the realm of, or just evolved to survive, but it still resulted from mass extinction. Overfishing ruins a sea population. And migration, like, as I said, the thing with the crab seasons, I remember hearing they were going to have limited crab seasons for some periods. This was weird. I was like, because the crab population either moved or was in danger. Now,
That's
take
interesting.
that for what it's worth, right? That is real. You're talking about, but there's also the liberal people, they don't understand. Animals that are aggressive, we're not talking caribou, we're not talking them. Boars are overly aggressive. Oh yeah, you can't go kill boars? I mean, mountain lions and those type things, predators, don't usually attack humans on sight unless you do something to them. Bears generally don't care either, unless it's a starving bear in the middle of winter, or hunter goes to bear, crashes in woods, or said irritates bear.
Or babies are around and bear wants to protect
And
baby.
bear, yeah, and then bear gets aggressive and slashes human. Yes, very much the case. But that's like nature taking its course, you know.
Natural selection, folks.
But
We need more of that.
But here's the thing: overfishing.
Actually, D-Lord, maybe the white need to go extinct because we are goddamn stupid for centuries now. So maybe that's what's going on. Nature selection. They eradicate the whites. Maybe that's what's going on.
I don't know. The big thing, right, is with overfishing and environmentalism, they always overlook one or two sections of what their policies are. You need, like, you want to make water power. Water power can kill off entire fish populations. River populations are maintained by. There is something to be said. If you dam a river, you stop the flow of salmon or fish that migrate inland to breed.
We get it. We changed the planet, so the planet changes.
But if we're on the ocean and we overfish,
that's bad. Overfishing is bad.
First of all, that's a lie. It's actually two lies. First of all, he is not an outsider. Carney is a consummate, bureaucratic, liberal insider. He's the godfather of Chrystia Freeland's child, and his new
he was
cabinet
there
is
in
composed
2000
of
as well.
all the people who played the roles that we've described already in the Trudeau years. And it's certainly the case that he hasn't budged from his presumption that we have to hit net zero by 2050, because that's still up on his website. And he could say that he wants to lead Canada into an industrial future that's successful, but if you read his book Values, you'll see that he means that we're going to produce a new renewable economy, which in Canada is insane, apart from perhaps hydroelectric production and nuclear, if the Greens were willing to go in that direction. But what Carney means by industrial progress on the Canadian front is a new and unproven economy that relies primarily on a net zero shift and renewables. So now we might say, how has that worked out in the rest of the world? Well, Canada's attempts on the environmental front have had absolutely no effect whatsoever on the health of the atmosphere globally, despite the fact that it's cost Canadians their primacy of position economically and put us on a downward trend that is likely to continue for at least 40 years. If you want a future for your children and your grandchildren that is characterized by more and more wealth disparity and increasing emphasis on a net zero future and massive disparity between Canada and the US in terms of economic growth, then Carney's definitely your man. So with regards to this promised utopia of a new future, one of the things Carney says, for example, after he talks about the fact that 75% of our fossil fuel resources will have to be left in the ground, is this promised new magical utopia of renewable jobs, especially for places like Alberta. Now,
not really. Alberta is dying economically because they cannot produce, they cannot create anything because the liberals get in the way. But yeah, renewable jobs, sure.
He says that if we unleash innovation in the private sector, that all the problems that are associated with the transition to net zero will somehow be solved. So let's see what's happened in countries where that's actually being attempted. So I think we should talk about Germany and the UK. So Germany has been more green, arguably, than Canada, let's say, for the last 10 years. And they've shut off their nuclear plants and they've made a transition to renewables. And so what's the consequence of that? Well, one consequence is that German energy prices are now 5 times as expensive as they are in the US.
So that means it will cost you guys, you and I, and the taxpayer, everyone that is not rich, it will cost 5 times more than what we are paying already. Amazing, right? The richer are even richer. This is Carney agenda.
That's what I was talking about. I just had a conversation with my friend in Germany where I asked him about the wood power. Like, they normally have wood power stoves or wood stove stoves anyways, because that's like a survival thing in cabin. But like, I mentioned that where they had the whole idea they had to reopen up strip mining coal in farmland territory, like in the US as a prime example too. Like everywhere you see like these areas, like if we told people the reason, okay, I have to get that, but like in the UK, right, they have coal, they have all of this, but you can't get it out of the ground because they don't want it. You could attempt clean coal. It's going to have some, but it is a source of fuel. It is a source. Germany has all but, with their ideas, shot themselves in the foot repeatedly.
That's a liberal.
They have done the net zero thing. They have tried it. It's led to brownouts in power grids. It's left them almost going back. The average house has to have a wood-burning fireplace. Multiple places where not just to survive, they have basically had an entire, I'm not saying failure in their grid yet. They cannot keep a decent energy policy. Their energy policy is what liberals have wanted in the US. But this is the big deal, the big but. I mean, it's possible to redo or undo, but how do you provide power? That's the problem. And they never find that.
So let's hear more about that.
And then you might say, well, that's a small price to pay for saving the planet, but then we could take that apart. So Germany is rapidly deindustrializing and their economy is tanking, and all the industrial production that they no longer manage is only shifting to other places in the world like China and India. So it's not like it's going away. It's just not happening in Germany. And they're increasingly dependent on renewables, solar and wind. And Germany is one of the world's sunniest countries, and it's also susceptible to what they call wind drought. So there are long periods of time where the solar arrays and the windmills aren't producing any electricity. And like zero electricity is not very much electricity.
Oh. Imagine that, like here in Canada, sometimes we have -40. Oh, no more electricity, freeze to death, right? You care so much about people. That's the liberals for you, the liberals.
Now, why is that a catastrophe? It's like, well, do you want your refrigerator on or off? Or even more to the point, do you want to be able to go to the hospital and make sure that there's electricity when you're having...
Do you want to survive the -40 temperature we will have? That's exactly
emergency surgery, etc. And there are signs, for example, that places like Australia that have been moving down the renewable pathway are facing the imminent threat of rolling blackouts, and that could easily happen in places like Germany. Okay, so now the problem with renewables is that we can't store the energy. We don't have the battery technology and the battery infrastructure, not even close, and it's going to be a long time before we do, at least 20 years, maybe longer than that. And so the question is now, what do you have to do? Because renewable energy is so unreliable. Sometimes this, like at night, the sun doesn't shine, in case you hadn't noticed, and the wind stops blowing. And so then renewable production falls to zero. Now you have...
I wish the green people, they were not stubborn and deaf. I wish they would see that kind of statement there and listen to that kind of interview and just wake up and realize, dang, that's actually bad. We don't want that. Because, of course, we don't want that. We want to survive when there's a -40 freaking degrees outside. We cannot rely on green energy in 2025. It's just not possible. So let's just play the rest. It's hilarious. I like the sound of Jordan Peterson take and all of that.
Have to have something to back that up. And worse, you have to have something of the same size as the entire renewable grid, because otherwise it can't handle the power demands. And so that means that as you switch to a renewable grid, you have to have another grid in place that has exactly the same capacities, and it has to be not renewable. So what that means is that when you build a renewable grid, you build it in addition to the pre-existing grid. And then you might say, well, if the renewable sources aren't producing energy, you could just turn to nuclear, but there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, you can't turn a nuclear power plant on and off quickly, as you might well imagine. And the Germans, for example, scuttled their nuclear plants. And so what have they done? They've turned to coal burning plants. And the Germans don't burn anthracite, which is high quality coal that doesn't produce much particulate matter, which is like the dust pollution that would be associated with smog. And they burn lignite, which is low quality coal, and it produces a lot of particulate, plus it produces a lot of carbon dioxide. And so what's happened in Germany after 10 years of green idiocy is that their power prices are 5 times as expensive. They're hyper reliant on places like Russia and the Middle East for their fossil fuel production, not least.
And these are bad places. So they fuel into the economy of bad places because they cannot count on green energy. And he said it, it's been 10 years it's like that in Germany. So Germany are goddamn stupid, and we are heading toward the same hole. We can call that a hole because that's a hole. This is a pit. We are falling in a deep pit. It's a ravine. It's a cliff. This is where we are heading at with Canada. I hate the sound of it. So yeah, it's happening. This is what we will get.
Because Canada was too daft to enter into an agreement with them, and they pollute more per unit of energy produced than they did 10 years ago. So
this is great, folks. They pollute more, but this is great. So you see, Carney globalist agenda, it will pollute more. Even if he wants to save the planet, it will pollute more. Like Jordan Peterson did some research, and he compared actual facts, and we can go bring that up, I'm sure. Like right now we are mostly reacting to that, but like it's backed up. And it's funny how he doesn't mention Portugal and Spain, how they just went black. It's in the dark, and they're using green energies there. It's in the dark for days. They were in the dark for days.
Even if you accept the environmentalist argument that carbon dioxide overproduction is an existential crisis, which it isn't, and you say, well, something substantial needs to be done to ameliorate the threat, you have to observe that when something substantial has been done, so that's the creation, let's say, of a renewable power grid, the consequence is not only that the atmosphere doesn't improve with regards to carbon dioxide proportion, but that the pollution problem actually gets much worse, as well as energy becoming more expensive and unreliable.
All to be green. So, in fact, being green the way Carney wants it will make things worse. So, I just like that music in my ears. What Jordan Peterson says, it's amazing. More people should be awake and go watch Jordan Peterson content. For real, he speaks the truth. He speaks
and
the
so
truth.
what? That's what you want Carney to do for Canada. And for Canada, there's
I
not a
want
country
that.
in the world
I
that's
didn't
more
vote for
dependent
Carney.
fundamentally
I know
for its
lots of people that
existence
didn't vote for
on
Canada,
reliable
but not me.
energy, because Canada is uninhabitable without an unbelievably well-developed industrial.
In case some people forget, we got snow and cold 6 months a year. It's still kind of cold where I am in Canada right now. And we are in May. It's not even spring yet.
Energy infrastructure just to keep us alive when it's 40 bloody below. And then our economy is radically dependent on our natural resource production. Now, it shouldn't be that dependent on natural resource production, because we should be doing value-added investment, for example, refining our fossil fuel resources to a higher degree than we currently do. Most of that's done in the United States, and we should do.
And also, a lot of our resources are on the ground because the liberals, they stop that. They don't want us to use our resources. They don't want us to flourish and be rich. They want us to be green, even if green doesn't mean green.
Do things to ensure that we make the proper transition into a technologically driven future. But Carney says absolutely nothing about any of that in his book Values. And so he just...
And Carney doesn't have a plan. I can bet he's just freestyling. He doesn't know what he's doing in office. Like the perfect example would be his meeting with Trump in the Oval Office. I cannot wait to react to that eventually. But it's hilarious. It's ridiculous. We elected a clown. This is the Canadian people here. We elected a clown. Carney the clown.
Magically hand waves and says, oh, well, if you unleash the private sector, there'll be this magical net zero transformation, and everyone will have much more productive jobs, and the planet will be much greener, and we won't need to rely on fossil fuels. Well, we don't just rely on fossil fuels for energy, folks. We rely on fossil fuels to make damn near everything that we make, including our agricultural products. And so you also hear the net zero people claiming that agricultural production has to be slashed radically. And so you can imagine what that's going to do to food costs if you haven't noticed. And
it will skyrocket, probably 3 to 5 times, just like energy. If energy costs 5 times more to produce, trust me, the food will cost 5 times more to make as well. If something rises up, everything rises. So to be more green, you will be in more debt and more inflation, more tax, more everything. It will cost you so much. This is the Liberals. The Liberals, they want to run Canada through the ground. And they want us to be down, buried.
Part of the reason for that is that the fertilizers that we use, ammonia, for example, are created out of fossil fuels. And so you have no idea how much the entire economy, and so that's your bread and butter and your house and your heating and your air conditioning and your travel and your vacations and your kids' future, that's all dependent on the fossil fuel economy. And so Carney, there's 2 tacks you can take to Carney. One is either he's learned that his net zero preoccupation was wrong, which means every single thing he thought while he was being educated and while he had his highfalutin career, every single thing he thought was radically not only wrong, but the opposite of the truth. That's one conclusion. Or he still thinks what he's always thought, which is certainly what it seems to be in his book Values, and certainly seems to be the case with his continuing insistence that we have to hit net zero by 2050 and spend $2 trillion doing it. The alternative conclusion to he was just radically wrong and has learned is that he hasn't learned a damn thing. And it's still his fundamental axiomatic presupposition that human being industrial production leading to carbon dioxide overproduction is an existential threat.
And it's hilarious. Let's be scared. Let's fearmonger people. I mean, this was Carney campaign, fearmongering people. That was his campaign. So I think we will have like a commercial very soon. I'm not quite sure when exactly, but hopefully I will.
No, the big thing is you're talking about when you're talking endpoint liberal democracy, it goes one of two ways, right? It's either going to go towards, look, they want a utopia, always. They're going for the utopia. But if they get the utopia, it's just a separate measure. Now, the issue itself, right, is like, it's this strange thing of Carney is a true believer in what he says. That's the trick. The problem is they don't realize that endpoint that they are searching for is destructive.
And sometimes it's very dangerous. Sometimes the true believer are dangerous. A lot of true believer, especially in religion, they just blow themselves up and they delete people. So it's dangerous. The true believer is always dangerous.
If you told a liberal person, hypothetically, that let's say liberals do not understand. So we used to have the saying about a slippery cliff, right? Slippery slope. You legalize a Schedule 1 drug, or let's say you decriminalize marijuana, as an example. It's just a low-end substance. Nothing happens. Oh, you need to decriminalize crack, meth, and all of this, right? It slowly opened up the door. We're like, so legalization is going to open up. You're going to soft say recreational use.
Open Pandora box.
And then it ends with like, but you need to have the shelters so the heroin addicts don't die on the street. Inject here. And then it gets to like, so if you literally tell these people down the line, they make a problem, quite literally. Like it goes, what we're like, conservative people or normal thinking people go, doesn't the end goal in that open up? Like if I had to say to a liberal, you were going to go from you wanting this because of your bad choices, we wind up with you freeing like Black Lives Matter protesters protesting the government after they burnt down cities. A liberal person would go, nah, we would never do that. Flash forward 5-6 years, they're bailing out criminals that burn down blocks. Like, we're like, well,
can't do anything. There's no consequence, folks.
So decriminalization, right? Because you need to eventually we have a spike in crime. What are the crime? We need to decriminalize. What? No, just give these people tickets. They aren't going to come back. They aren't going to come back repeatedly.
They will pay it with their dry money.
That should be everyone's top priority for every financial decision that they make, and that everything should be secondary to that. And that implies that his claim to eliminate the carbon tax, for example, and to move Canada onto a more solid industrial footing in the future is just a lie.
And now I think there's a commercial break.
No, but what I was gonna say, right? We finished with say like so New York. What happened in all these Democrat cities? They started doing zero bail policies because they were like, well, we can't hold these people in jail, and if we hold them, they're just going to be criminals. Like, let's give them an ability to do stuff. They were finding recidivism rates were erupting. Like, they would take these guys in. There would be entire people, like in New York, that would commit petty thefts, be arrested, and know they have to be released. This is a result.
I'm not
like
surprised.
This
is
like when you're talking about an idea of an end point of how people think. We warn them this is what's going to happen. Like, it's a goes beyond that. I would say slow tolerance, right? And it's nothing like, I'm not saying this is a bad argument or bad thing to happen versus you have to. It's tough to really just say because I've seen, like, in real time, like Dane and them rationalize their choices in the next choices they make.
That's the
due to harm
policy.
reduction. Due to harm reduction. Because in other stuff. And I'm just like, how can I predict this? Because this is the end policy. Because whether it's environmental or that, they don't see the societal issue down the line. You have to think it out.
Yeah, that's true. And now let's play more of the utopia that the liberals put out there.
The AI and machine learning at netsuite.com.
I thought the commercial was done here.
So you're going to have me actually start editing out commercials.
A short haul flight every 3 years, for example, a radical reduction in the amount of meat that you eat, a radical reduction in private car ownership. And you might think, well, that's paranoid conspiracy theory, but you can go look at the documents of the C40 coalition of the top cities in the world and look at their aims for the next 20 years. And you can decide if they're on the same side as Carney or whether they're on your side. And you can draw your own conclusion. Because if your presumption is that the planet is facing an environmental catastrophe because of carbon dioxide production, and that's such an emergency that we have to do every possible thing we can with every financial decision, no matter how much it costs to ameliorate it, then there's no limit whatsoever to the amount of power that you're willing to expend to make that happen. And we know what'll happen because it's already happened to Germany and the UK, and it's happened to a large degree to Canada. And there's no reason to assume at all that Mark Carney is a leopard who's changed his spots. Quite the contrary. And so what's the conclusion with regards to his pedigree? It's like Mark Carney's an educated person and he's no fool, but he's completely untested in the electoral domain, and he obviously has contempt for it because he's willing to be prime minister and to act like a governing prime minister.
And to top that, the meeting he had in the Oval Office with Trump proved to everyone that's not a bias or a sheep or a stupid being, that Mark Carney is not fit, he is not a leader, he is not taken seriously by Trump. It's hilarious. Whoever stand by Carney after seeing that meeting is brainwashed by liberal ideal. And
I think I saw that. I saw a news story, but I looked into, didn't read the article, but the photo they used, look at Trump. I hate to say it may have just been a bad angle, and a couple of them just looked at Carney like.
Carney is terrible during that meeting.
I could just tell the meeting was bad. It was like, oh, I'm going to congratulate you.
It was a bloodbath.
And I'm like, I'm sure in Trump fashion, he did something.
Yeah, we will cover that eventually.
It's
But
gonna be funny, but I'm
it's-
pretty sure
it's a disaster.
he just did his.
Canada is weak under Carney leadership.
Minister,
Well,
despite the fact that he's never put his policies to test in front of the Canadian electorate, despite the fact that only 130,000 people have positioned him as Prime Minister, and despite the fact that he's apparently willing to deceive Canadians about being an outsider, which he most certainly is not, and with regards to his actual aims.
And it's not the first or last time he deceives Canadian. He is a liar. He lied all the time in his rally, in interviews, and he even lied about a lot of things, like him standing up to Trump. He didn't really stand up to Trump. He just said we are not for sale, but he didn't counter argue or he didn't counter offer. And he didn't
here's the thing. Go into your You're going to go into Trump's office, the Oval Office, where clearly, I mean, we've all seen what happened with Zelensky.
It's not Zelensky bad, but I'd say
we saw what happened with Zelensky, which Zelensky tried to stand on principle despite being a corrupt human being that we know he is, because Russia has announced they don't want peace either, or their peace is unattainable as well. That's coming out of documents, so we'll probably have another offensive start over there pretty soon. The idea is Zelensky standing on principle. At least he can say in front of Vance, because Trump has to make himself not look weak. But like Carney is already that placid liberal guy like Trump's used to dealing with.
Spineless as well.
Of course, it's going to look pretty bleak. Like he's going to go, oh, you're not going to step on Canada, but secretly he's gone to Trump and say, I have to say this because of reasons. But he probably explained more to Trump about why he acts the way he does. But Trump understands. But it's not the fact he's lying as much as he doesn't have a bargaining chip.
And he has no spine.
Because it's like Zelensky asking for money, but he had to admit and break down, come to the U.S., but Trump, of course, he's asking Trump to appeal to an emotional being in a war for a long time. But Trump does have the point of, we're giving you money, and what are you doing with it? Because you don't have a leverage. You have to come into an argument. Now, if you're coming to meet Trump without leverage or an argument, and he's just come off an election arguing against liberals, which are arguably smarter than the Canadian ones.
Yeah, it's not arguably.
It's going to be the most awkward meeting in the Oval Office known to man, because our cycle, and this is also Trump you're dealing with.
Trump was also mocking the debates we had here, which is hilarious. Trump was right.
How could I have called that? Because it's just because we look at it, we're like, see, remember what I said to you? First time seeing this? This is our election cycle for the longest time.
I like that.
Congratulations.
I like that. You see, if you guys don't crash and liberals are elected again in the next election, I think I will go in the U.S. I'm so tired of Canada for real.
Bear in mind, it depends where you move, but the idea, right, is, why can I predict the way your politics are moving in Canada? That's because, as I've said, we've seen this playbook here. We have seen it. You're the Indian guy. He literally is saying talking points that I hear out of our Democrats that have fallen flat and got them kicked out of power. So run with that, please. But
Hell yeah. Let's
you
do
guys,
this.
but here's the thing. You need the voting base that
Yeah.
will vote them out.
Yeah.
Now
We don't have that. That's the thing. Here in Canada, we are weak and we are brainwashed like really badly.
I call it it's a social conditioning. It's
Yeah.
not like it's the worst, because you remember what I said before that election with you? I said it was like, what's going to happen is Carney is the safest bet amongst the liberals. Liberals will break for Carney because the Indian guy is too crazy, and the Quebecer
Conservative is
First
scary.
Party is too much a thing, right?
Yeah.
So you get what I'm saying. Like, a lot of our politics, you are at the end stage of what they wanted to do with our liberalism, but your people are more placid
Yeah.
versus having the ability. See, at least the downside to ours is we can have a population shift, and they attempt it. So
Yeah.
it's
which is net zero by 2050. And he's willing to claim the contrary because he's going to turn Canada into an industrial powerhouse. So that means he's either wrong about everything he's believed in the last 20 years, and radically so, or he's lying because he thinks the emergency justifies it, and maybe because he's after power. Now let's investigate
He's
that a little bit.
power.
So,
Carney is
primarily
power
after
hungry.
power? Perhaps for the reasons that we just described, perhaps because he's using the reasons we just described, his concern for the future, to justify his grip on power. That's another alternative. Well, let's see how he's conducted himself. Well, he hasn't come clean to Canadians with regards to his true aim. It's like, is he a net zero advocate by 2050 or not? Well, we want to build Canada into an industrial powerhouse. It's like, which is it, buddy? Because you're not going to do both. You're not going to crisscross Canada with fossil fuel pipelines while aiming at net zero by 2050. You're not going to do that. And so you were either wrong, and so wrong that it's a miracle, or you're deceiving Canadians because you think the emergency justifies it. That's the stark reality of the situation. Now, what is the evidence that the more stark reality, for example, that Carney is deceiving Canadians, what's the evidence that that's the case? Okay, well, let's say that it wasn't the case and that he's playing a straight game. Well, so then you got to ask yourself, why did he
Carney playing a straight game when he had arrangement with China, and when he wants us to become like China? No, there's no way it's happening.
so here's the thing, like in the UK, the question is why did he get out of the UK? You have to ask, did he get out of the UK because there was clearly a liberal backlash, right?
Not really. They still cannot speak out. I mean,
okay, it's not. No, you
speak out, be in jail. That's what's going on in the
here's the
UK.
thing. They had to have a shakeup in theirs because like there's something going on. Sorry, I had to stop speaking because apparently it's like, God. So the idea is he probably fled his position in the UK because that fiscal policy started to collapse due to all the directions that their country was taking. Not that he maybe had supported the position versus what wound up shaking out. Because when he was in, I guess, the governor or working in the Bank of England or whatever for that period of time, that fiscal policy shifted or backlashed, right? So the thing about it is, it's going to carry over to Canada. Now, the thing is, clearly his vision of liberalism didn't work in the UK because when it's coming down to the practice, it's imploding. Now, he's bringing this over to Canada. Now, understanding that policy, he's going to carry out the same vision that he wants there. Now, does your populace support it, or are they going to vote him out?
I
Because
think the opposition will most likely try to kick him out, but maybe it will get a majority if some people flip and it goes against the democracy we have here. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, he cheated. It was proved now after like almost 2 weeks after the election. It was rigged. There are some places they did interference, um, and they proved it. Um, they are also they forgot some of the ballots. They didn't count every ballots, and it didn't really change that much the outcome. But still, if they forget ballots like that, it's ridiculous. Some people brought ballots home. That's ridiculous. The fact that now we have a by-election and the people that did interference in Carleton to remove the seat from Pierre Poilievre, the opposition leader. They want to do it again during the by-election to make sure he doesn't get back in the House of Commons.
Are you talking about flawed electoral policy where you have to go down somewhere and count the ballots?
Not exactly. So what happened is each ballot you have 3 to 5 candidates you can vote for, and in the county of Pierre Poilievre, the opposition leader, we had 91, and it's some random people that and they also admitted and they were vocal about it. They're like, here it's flawed, and let's do interference, and we added these 85-ish name to the sheet, and they could because there's no specific law that stops it from happening.
Do you not have a local governing council that goes over ballots, like election committees?
We do have, but that's a bit different. These people they added names to the list, and
See, that's scummy. Like, that's the weird thing. Because here in the US, we have primaries, and to get on, you can't just, yeah, you have a write-in ballot. Like, if enough people write in and want to make Bill Doe president, and if Bill Doe accepts it, that person can become president, but you have the write-in, right? But, like, you only have, like, we at least go over our ballots.
they don't here.
But prior,
They don't.
now, where our election fraud happens is when you count it.
Oh, as well, when they
Like-
counted, some people brought ballot home instead of just counting them on where they should be counted at. Some people just brought ballot home, and when they did the counting, they forgot entire ballots with like 800 or 800 votes or so, or stuff like that. It's ridiculous.
So you're talking about in the US, we had the whole thing of certain areas where more people, if you really look back, you can find more people voted
And
for a person who
Yeah.
lived in the district. You had like, oh, there was just a mysterious drop off of ballots stuck in ballot boxes at the end. Yeah, that happened here. Yes,
yeah,
it did.
and another thing weird happened. Some people they went to vote, and when they came in, they were told, "Oh, you already voted," and they're like, "Wait, what? No!" And
We call
they
that
needed
voter
to
fraud.
fight. Yeah,
Voter
they
fraud.
needed to fight. They needed to fight to be authorized to vote, and that opens investigation because it's illegal to vote more than once.
What? No. What was it? No. What was it? Was like motor. Like, well, in the U.S. we have the dead voter pool, or the motor voter pool, as sometimes it's called.
Yeah, we had the same.
Like we had like where. Okay, so during COVID, as an example, there was so. Okay, why Pennsylvania was so different or better? See, Trump lost Pennsylvania by 200,000 votes or a little over, right? Normally, towards the end of election night, we all know how basic math works. If I'm going to ask you this, do you think at some point, even if all of Philadelphia voted for Biden, Trump would have still lost that state?
Yeah.
He was ahead by at least 200,000 votes. So, with enough margin. He somehow, towards the end, every single ballot that came in voted for Biden. Now, a lot of the accusations were mishandling votes, or it's just later districts, which were Democrat districts, came in for Biden, as an example. Some were claiming, oh, that's just ballot stuffing. And now, what's weird is it sounds strange without actual local, like when the Russians got in, they were tampering with voting machines, right?
Yeah,
Russian
send weird email to people here, so they do interference everywhere.
What the funny part is, our voting machines, right? You have to interact with them directly with software and go in through them, and that's a whole major controlled process.
That's true. That's a big issue.
Now, I don't know, but when you start hearing with mail-in voting ballots, and they said you already voted, so when I go vote, I have to present an ID. I have to go do this. So either they're taking into account someone falsely claimed to vote, A, or B, someone used their name. Now, voter ID laws, so when you go to vote, you have to show your actual ID. You have to. And they write it and you have to sign. You have to go within a district you're a part of. And they have you unregistered.
Yeah. So I will say Carney is not your guy. It's
parachute himself into power the way he did. And why has he claimed publicly that he's an outsider?
He's not.
But let's say
more lies.
Let's say just throwing out a
look
wild
at you trying to preserve the relationship all of a sudden.
A wild hypothetical. Let's say the candidate wasn't part of the government. Let's say the candidate did have a lot of economic experience. Let's say the candidate did deal with crises. Let's say the candidate had a plan to deal with the challenges in the here and now.
He has no plan. That's more lie. He just wants to increase.
I wonder when this interview was done. He doesn't realize. He talked to Jon Stewart. He doesn't realize Jon Stewart is a classical liberal, and even if, like, him and O'Reilly argue a lot, but Jon Stewart,
you sneaky.
So I'll let it play out.
You're running as an outsider.
He's
I am an outsider.
He proclaimed that on American television on the Jon Stewart show in front of like millions of people.
Hold on. That was the world's biggest shit-eating grin from Carney.
Yeah.
If you go back, that's the world's biggest shit-eating grin. And if you go back and you look at, like, Jon Stewart's face, that's like, what the... You're a scumbag. The thing about Jon Stewart is, Jon Stewart might be a partly deranged liberal sometimes, but he does have principles.
Yeah.
That's the scary
right. So that's an international claim. We'll give the devil his due a little bit more. Carney's actually learned. He saw what happened under Trudeau. He can see that the net zero pursuit is untenable, although he has not formally repudiated it one bit, and it's still written down in black and white in his values. But then what would he do? Here, he'd call an election because he's duty bound, morally bound to call an election. And he would make the election long as he possibly could, because that way he could go door to door and he could meet the Canadian public and he could let them get to know who he is, and he could take questions, intrusive questions from the press without getting peevish and annoyed. and he would outline his new industrial vision, and he would say why he was wrong about net zero and about ESG. That's that presumption that there should be central planning to fill the gaps of the free market, and that he was wrong about DEI, and that's about everything that he believed, and that he didn't understand Canada's core values. And despite the fact that he was absolutely wrong about everything he believed, he's now the guy to lead the country into an industrial revolution. And he could take a couple of months to convince Canadians of that, or he could call a snap election, hoping that all of the noise around Donald Trump and his relatively foolish proclamations re Canada has given Carney a undeserved advantage, and he could shorten the election cycle so that Canadians can't figure out who the hell he is, and rely on the apparent validity of his resume to propel him into the seat of the prime ministership. And so what's he doing? Well, you can ask yourself that. It's like, did you know any of these things about Carney that I just described? And if you didn't know them, well, why didn't you know them?
They knew,
they
didn't know, and they voted for him.
Although he did write the book Values, but who's read that, right? But I read it, and I understood it, and I'm doing my best to explain to you what it meant. He's got the wrong idea about Canadian values, because we're not a fundamentally utopian, socialist, elitist, top-down, central planning society. We're a Western democracy. And the principles that Carney outlined as cardinal values of Canadians are not the cardinal values of Canadians. And it's an interesting thing for the bloody Liberals to do anyways, because under Trudeau, we heard nothing but the proclamation that Canada had no core set of values, and that we were really a post-national state, and that insofar as we had any national identity at all, it was mostly that of genocidal, capitalist, patriarchal oppressors. And
we are just getting more of the same. People hated Trudeau, people hate Carney if they see us
could be waving the flag of Canadian virtue at this point, well, also proclaiming that they've got their finger on what the Canadian core values are, translated into DEI and ESG and net zero, which are radical, leftist, globalist, utopian, top-down, central planning dogmas that are incredibly expensive and truly ill-advised. Now, Carney, as far as I can tell, would rather that you didn't figure that out. And the reason for that is that he's riding high in the polls because Canadians look at his resume and they think he's qualified. And I can understand that.
And I attest to that. I talked to a lot of stupid sheeps. They were like, oh, he's a banker, he's qualified. Did you read his book? You didn't read his book. You just thought he was, because this is the image he wanted to project to people, not the image of a leader.
Here's the thing with your advantage. Like, I had to ask, so you have that European style of, I'm not saying weird democracy, where you do not have, the benefits of us having a very long, expensive courtship with our candidates, like our election cycle, you could arguably say we get to know the ins and outs, how they eat, breathe, and they shit, to the point of our election cycles leading up go from sometimes one to another, right?
Us, it's not like that.
It's here, people go, oh, you just need the 6 months to get to know them, and that's the limit to campaign. I'm like,
that's even less this time around because they rushed to the election. They knew what they were doing.
Parliamentary does. So let me say this. This is how ours. So what Carney, I think, pulled off is he was able to bluff what he has done. The problem is if people tried to vet him, he was smart enough not to incriminate himself. Even in the debate we went over, you could tell he had some really bad positions, but he stayed quiet. What did I say? He knew how to stay quiet. He knew how to do the politician thing, not to say anything stupid. It's kind of like during our election, the only reason Kamala Harris had a snowball's chance in hell of beating Trump was because she did not do any interviews. She stayed quiet.
Carney ran away from interviews.
She stayed away. She went to easy sources where she could get good questions in a good setting.
That's what they did with Carney as well.
Carney probably played it safe. He
did
knew to talk to. He knew to talk to. Like talking to Jon
propaganda
Stewart.
machine media. This is what we talk to.
So, and then you have a short election cycle. A short election cycle.
Usually it's longer. It's only this time around they rushed it because they knew they would lose if it was longer.
Well, okay. There's an idea. Now, it would have been interesting to see, right?
That's the shortest election I've ever had, I think. So it was like 2 months. So usually it's like at least 6 months.
Let's take the guy. Your three liberal people were divided.
Yeah.
That was like literally. But if it was on stage between the conservative guy and Carney, let's say there was maybe another person up there representing independents or libertarians, right? A 3-way instead of a 5-way.
Yeah.
The questions, his positions would have shown more.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And it's
at the surface, his resume.
But I'll say this. This is why he could not have hid his thing. Even in a complicit with a complicit debate person.
Yeah.
The guy, you guys have open questions. That person, there was like during our debates, Trump was fighting the moderator.
Yeah.
So.
Is impressive.
Sorry.
But the question is, what has all that experience taught him? Well, it's taught him to be elitist to the extreme. It's taught him that him and his cabal of compatriots at the globalist level know better than you dim-witted peasants who are going to have to pay the price for his utopian vision. And it's taught him that while the environmental crisis is so terrible, that's the carbon dioxide problem, that it's up to a handful of globalist elites to take the steps necessary to put things right. And if that means that the typical Canadian has to be made poor, well, that's going to happen anyways as the planet boils. And besides that, you peasants are too dim-witted to understand the nature of the, what would you say, existential threat that confronts you. And it's too bad for you that your children are going to be poor.
And this is where we end off this part. The next reaction we will be doing will be maybe Saturday late night if you are available, D-Lord. And we will finish that on Saturday. What do you have going on the end of the internet?
I don't know. I'm trying to figure out. As I said, I think, it's like today I've been having it move through D4 at least too. But I do need to finish out maybe tonight. But as I said, I really just have to finish out Expedition 33. Got that. I keep saying that. Then I realize I'm trapped in Diablo 4. But depends people play. But then I have Doom the Dark Ages on the 15th. And then I have whenever Mandalore actually gets better, we are going to go over Andor.
Amazing.
I need to lately it's just been gaming stuff. But yeah, but no, the thing is what you're seeing here, and I'm seeing it with Canada, like things with VPN. Like the worst thing that could happen, right? It's the end goal. What I'm seeing with you guys is in-stage liberalism. In-stage liberalism, right, where enough of your population tipped left at some point, where you only had left or far left largely to vote on because your conservatives lost a lot of their positions. It wasn't like in the U.S. The thing in the U.S., basically, liberals and conservatives fight for the voice of the majority to vote for them, because it is always a mistake in the U.S. Like this last time around, like it's not in a nutshell to explain. Progressives and Democrats. Progressives only have like support of about 20% of the population. Only when if I did a thing on my channel where I showed how much do you, and I could send you the study multi, and it's really is a study of how many people use words and the leanings of those people. It's a very small population. Conservatives are also in that branch. Conservatives might be a good chunk of people who vote Republican, but we still have far too many independents and libertarians in our country. Now, the silent majority rises up every so often and kicks the ruling party out.
We almost did that this election. If NPD didn't collapse, if NDP didn't collapse the way it did, we would have won.
Did the Indian guy keep his seat?
No, he got kicked out. Like, his party collapsed, literally. Like, what happened is we were always a 3-party system, and this time around it almost felt like a 2-party system. Like, they went from 24 seats to like 7 seats. And even Quebecer party lost a lot of seats. They went from 32, I think, to 21.
So it was a bloodbath. So
yeah.
your parliament. So it's like here.
And I will say this: the Conservative, they went from 919 to 144. So they gained 25 seats.
So it's the liberals shrinking, purifying themselves, because what happened here. Like, Tea Party people under Obama, right? The Tea Party people voted out the weakened moderates where they could take them out.
Yeah, that's basically what happened.
This led to years later, the Democrats eventually, because they needed to move their platform far left, go with a progressive voice or a far left voice. So they purged their moderates. But so when the time came for the Democrats to pay the price, they have no suitors. They have no replacements. Now, I don't know if that's the way in your system you have that type of system, but if that's the hypothetical case, you guys do not have a moderate voice to pull back the liberals. That's the thing, because if the furthest, and this is why U.S. midterms are going to be very heavily interesting to me.
Yeah.
Because we were promised a red wave a year before Trump was elected. Right? Because that was supposed to be a red wave election. That didn't happen until this last election.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that was because of fortification from Democrats or people didn't see it. Now, here, largely, the midterms will be a referendum on Trump. And then that said, you have to understand, if there is a referendum on Trump's policy, if Democrats lose more seats, that is bad tidings for them. Now, with you guys, you have snap elections and you have all of this. We have 2-year cycles or special elections. But what is
maybe that will happen to us? What can happen is, because as of right now, they are the minority, the liberals. So basically, if the Bloc and the Conservative try to team up, they can take down the Liberals, but they would need to team up.
Now,
And
what's let me say this: what's surprising in our politics, what's happening now, is there's a large number of Democrat retirements.
yeah,
Way ahead of time, or it's happening. This is not just people they're announcing they're not going to run. And that's a bad sign.
yeah,
That also means the DNC is going to have to start candidate shopping.
yeah,
And candidate shopping requires a lot of stuff. You need a person inside the district. To see how our politics
works better than us.
basically,
and that's enough
you
for that
need
outro, D-Lord.
you're good. But
So on my end of the internet, well, Saturday we finished that video. If you're available late night, I will text you as we get closer. And outside of that, well, next Tuesday we talk about movies again as usual. And we are out.